At 14:30 p.m. local time, 4 Ukrainian FPV drones lifted off from a position 2 kilometers west of the Dnipro riverbank, racing toward 4 Russian boats moving supplies to forward observation posts before sunset. Ukraine had planned an ambush. What they did not know was that their position had already been found. The FPVs climbed to 10 meters and accelerated southeast, cameras feeding back winding river channels and marshland. The Russian boats were still out of sight, hidden beyond the next bend, but both sides were closing on the same choke point. One pushing supplies upriver, the other trying to cut the line. Then the real threat appeared. The warning came from the spotter. The lead operator looked up just long enough to see a black dot falling fast, a triangular shape, a Lancet III diving straight at them. The FPV feed still showed his drone 6 kilometers downrange, but none of that mattered now. He reacted instantly. The primary antenna cable came free, the backup snapped in, and he sprinted for the trench. His partner was already moving toward a secondary control point 500 meters away. Seconds later, the Lancet locked onto the heat they had left behind. 3 seconds to impact. Both men dove into the timber-reinforced dugout as the strike drone hit their previous position. Dirt and debris shot nearly 20 feet into the air. For Titan Navy, this is modern warfare in its rawest form. Speed beats intent. Sensors beat bravery. Hesitation gets you killed. If you value clear real-world combat analysis, like the video, subscribe to Titan Navy and stay with us. Its 3-kilogram shaped charge warhead formed a focused copper jet capable of punching through steel. Here it tore straight through packed earth and timber, carving a brutal crater where the operators had been seconds earlier. But overhead, nothing interrupted what already mattered. The Ukrainian FPV drones were still flying. Those FPVs were now 2.5 kilometers into their route, crossing their first checkpoint, a destroyed wooden bridge used as a fixed navigation reference. The Russian boats remained upriver, cutting narrow wakes through tight channels, still pushing toward the same supply corridor. If Ukrainian control was not re-established, quickly, signal loss would become inevitable before the drones reached intercept range. That is where the Ubiquity Mesh network proved its worth. When the primary control node went dark, the system reacted exactly as designed. 5 radio nodes were distributed across 5 kilometers, each polling its neighbors 10 times per second. The moment the first node failed, routing tables updated within 100 milliseconds. An authenticated backup node assumed full control in 50 milliseconds total. So fast, the drones never registered a disruption. Their outbound cores remained stable. Telemetry stayed clean. The FPVs crossed a shallow basin. Battery indicators showed 85% remaining, enough to reach the target area with reserve power for evasive maneuvering. But the operators now faced a different threat. Range. Forced deeper into the trench network, the team was falling behind the drone's forward movement. Every meter of retreat increased the distance between controller and aircraft. At 6 kilometers, signal degradation would begin. The backup team had no choice. They had to move closer to the river, even though that meant pushing into terrain where Russian forces would expect follow on units to appear. They grabbed spare batteries, spectrum analyzers, and fresh antennas, then advanced east through zigzag trenches carved shallow into the delta mud. Standard Russian response time to a confirmed Ukrainian control node was 3 minutes. They had already survived a Lancet strike. Mortars or another drone would follow. Speed was no longer optional. Meanwhile, the FPVs crossed their second checkpoint, a cluster of collapsed fishing huts marking the entrance to a tangled maze of southern channels. The kind of terrain where boats slow down and drones decide who leaves floating and who does not. Titan Navy sees the pattern clearly. This is not chaos. This is adaptation under fire. And it is exactly how modern battles are won. Yesterday, the Russian boats had used the northern route. Today, the FPV camera feeds showed nothing there. The Russians had shifted 3 kilometers south, forcing the Ukrainian drones to widen their search pattern deeper into the delta. That single adjustment triggered a chain reaction. Extending the search meant the operators had to keep pace on the ground. The backup team pushed forward again, slipping between mud berms and shallow trenches while the spectrum analyzer stayed clean. No Russian emissions yet. That calm would not last. The Russians watched these approaches as well. After a Lancet strike, they expected Ukrainian operators to move toward the water. It was a predictable survival move, and predictability is exactly what attackers exploit for follow-on shots. 800 meters from the river, the second team reached a firing position, barely 2 feet high. It gave them line of sight for a clean signal and almost nothing else. They dropped behind it, reconnected antennas, and restored full-quality FPV video just in time. Ahead, the drones entered the outer delta channels. Battery level read 65%. The river geometry began to line up with the map overlays. Marshland narrowed into tight cuts where Russian boats would be forced to slow. This was the trap. The expected bottleneck was still 1 kilometer ahead. Then a sharp crack echoed from across the river. A sniper had them. The first round snapped overhead and missed. The second would not be as forgiving. The shooter had a clear lane across 600 meters of open water, every advantage on his side. No wind, no mirage, no terrain to break the shot. The Ukrainian team had barely settled into the firing slit when the second round tore past close enough to feel the pressure wave. The spotter rose into a half-crouch, exposing himself just long enough to do his job. His laser rangefinder returned distance within a single meter, providing elevation inclination and compass bearing. With the map sheet strapped to his forearm, the data produced a 10-digit grid precise enough to drop fire almost directly on the sniper's position. His partner was already on the encrypted radio, calling Kassan for immediate suppression. The urgency in his voice needed no explanation. The call followed doctrine to the letter. Grid first, target description second. Danger close, warning third, immediate suppression last. 600 meters qualified as danger close. At that range, even minor ballistic error could put rounds on the Ukrainian team. Under normal conditions, a single officer would still have to confirm the firing solution. Titan Navy notes the irony. While one side relied on a lone rifle and patience, the other turned seconds math and discipline into a weapon. In modern combat, precision beats bravado every time. Under danger close conditions, there is no room for shortcuts. 3 officers independently verified the grid, the fire control data, and the relative positions of friendly units. Powder temperature was checked twice because hotter propellant increases muzzle velocity and shifts impact points downrange. Barrel wear was logged. The firing angle had to be exact, not close. Exact. The Fire Direction Center pushed the coordinates into the digital system, which calculated the ballistic solution automatically. Air temperature, humidity, propellant burn characteristics. Tube wear, even the subtle lateral drift caused by Earth's rotation were factored in. This is the part most people never see. Artillery is not brute force. It is applied mathematics under pressure. The observer still had the hardest job. He had to watch the fall of shot, which meant exposing himself again. To understand what followed it helps to know how artillery measures angles. Crews do not use degrees, they use mils. 400 mils to a full circle. At 1 kilometer, 1 mil equals roughly 1 meter of lateral shift. Simple math even when rounds are cracking overhead. If a shell impacts 50 meters left at 1 kilometer, the correction is simple. Right 50, the guns shift 50 mils right. No trigonometry, just meters to mils 1-to-1. For this mission, the solution required 289 mils of elevation and 3,426 mils of deflection. In plain terms, the tube had to be raised to arc the shell across 18 kilometers and nudged right to land on the far bank. When the gun captain confirmed the data, the battery commander gave the order. Moments later, the first 155mm M795 projectile left the tube at 827 meters per second. Time of flight, 47 seconds. The sniper fired again. The third round snapped past and punched into the berm, less than a foot from the spotter's elbow. The shooter was good. His Dal Envy optic with integrated range finding removed guesswork on his end. Over open water with no wind, each shot walked closer. the observer rose again. Through his mil-dot reticle, he saw the first artillery, round impact 50 meters left of the target, throwing reeds and soil into the air. Not enough. He measured, keyed the radio, and spoke calmly. Right 50. Add 25. That adjustment shifted the gun slightly right and increased elevation just enough to extend range by roughly 25 meters. Within 30 seconds, 3 more shells were airborne. Each carried 10 kilograms of Composition B, the standard high explosive used across NATO's 155mm stockpile. With a 50-meter lethal radius, a direct hit would end the threat permanently. The second volley arrived in rapid sequence. The first detonated short. The second went long. The third landed directly on the sniper's firing point, erasing it in a vertical column of earth and shattered vegetation. The far bank went silent. That is what disciplined fire looks like. Not fast, not loud, just final. No more shots came across the water. The Ukrainian team treated the silence for what it really was. A window, not safety. They signaled the third team position 2 kilometers to the north. 3 fresh FPV drones spun up, gained satellite lock, and oriented south toward the channel maze where the first wave had disappeared. That third team was untouched and fully operational. Their drones were insurance. If anything went wrong, coverage would not collapse. The operators at the berm reconnected antennas and checked their feeds. The original FPVs were now deep in the southern channels, battery indicators sliding below 60%. The water darkened between the reeds. The delta tightened into narrow corridors where Russian boats would be forced to commit to a single path with no room to maneuver. On one feed, sunlight flashed across a ripple. On another, moving wakes cut clean lines through the surface. Heat signatures advanced through the channels, clustering into a tight column. 4 shapes, 4 engines. 4 Russian boats pushing hard toward the bottleneck. The Ukrainian operators steadied their hands and began feeding updated coordinates into the system. Everything that followed would unfold in seconds. The third team's drones were already airborne, closing fast. But now the Ukrainians were no longer alone in the sky. The first Russian FPV appeared at 2:00 high, a second at 9:00 low. A third came head-on. The Russians had adapted. They hunted in packs, each drone covering a different escape vector, turning the airspace into a moving trap. The Ukrainian operator's spectrum analyzer lit up. 3 signals on 5.8 GHz, each roughly 25 milliwatts, creating electromagnetic beacons, visible out to 2 kilometers. This was no longer one-sided hunting. It was mutual detection, mutual pursuit. Everyone could see everyone. That is the reality of modern FPV warfare. Any drone not using a fiber optic tether has to transmit back to its operator. That transmission is omnidirectional. It radiates in all directions, like a light bulb not focused like a laser. Any receiver within 2 kilometers can detect that 25 milliwatt signal, even if it cannot decode the video feed. The Russians had learned this lesson the cheap way. They started using basic spectrum analyzers, the kind that cost $40 online to scan the air. See a spike at 5.745 GHz, and you know someone is flying. At that point, it stops being stealth. It becomes a race of reflexes, discipline, and who makes the first mistake. A drone signal was growing stronger, then another, then several more. The drones were closing in fast. The Russians had developed a dedicated ramming drone doctrine specifically for operations in the Delta. Traditional air defense was useless in this environment. The targets flew too low, too slow, and were too small for missiles to track. Electronic jammers were an option, but each unit cost around $50,000 and interfered with friendly drones as well. In contrast, an FPV drone cost barely $500. Launching 6 drones to lose 5 and destroy a single Ukrainian drone was still considered cost-effective. Russian operators had been pre-positioned every 2 kilometers along the river, each team sitting with 10 drones armed and ready. The moment Ukrainian drones appeared, everything was launched at once. The lead Russian FPV dove from above, aiming for the blind spot directly above the Ukrainian drone's camera. The Ukrainian operator noticed the shadow expanding across his screen and reacted instantly, rolling hard to the right. The Russian drone missed by barely 2 meters and pulled up sharply, but that was exactly what the Russians expected. A second FPV was already waiting at the predicted escape path. Instead of maintaining altitude, the Ukrainian operator cut the throttle completely. The drone dropped like a stone. The second Russian FPV overshot, having anticipated level flight. But dropping lower brought the Ukrainian drone closer to the water, where the third Russian drone was already positioned. The physics of drone ramming are unforgiving. You are trying to strike a target the size of a pizza box, while both machines are moving at nearly 100 kilometers per hour. Human reaction time is roughly 250 milliseconds. Video feed latency adds another 50. By the time an operator sees the target, reacts, and sends a command, the drone has already traveled 8 meters. By the time the image reached his screen, his drone had already moved 8 meters. He was aiming at where the target had been, a quarter second earlier. The Ukrainian pilot pulled up hard motors, screaming at maximum RPM, barely missing the third Russian drone that surged upward to intercept him. Now the geometry had shifted. All 3 Russian FPVs were below him, forced to climb against gravity, while he could dive with gravity on his side. He banked sharply toward the sun, knowing the glare would wash out their cameras and blind them for a few precious seconds. But it wasn't enough. More Russian drones were launching. He could see them on his feed. Small dots lifting from concealed positions along the riverbanks. 4, 5, 6 FPVs converging. They didn't need to be skilled. They needed to be numerous. Sooner or later, one would get lucky. The ramming attacks served another purpose. Even when they missed, they forced Ukrainian operators into constant evasive maneuvers. Every hard turn drained battery life. Every second spent dodging drones was a second not spent hunting boats. The pressure compounded knowing multiple enemy FPVs were tracking you while you were tracking boats, while your battery ticked down, and mortar crews were likely already plotting your launch point. Some operators cracked under that strain, aborting missions with half their battery remaining. Others pushed too far, flying until their drones simply fell out of the sky. But not today. In his peripheral vision, the Ukrainian operator finally saw what he had been searching for. 4 Zodiacs moving through the channels below, not 3 as expected. They were running in column formation through a narrow 10-meter channel, completely unaware of the aerial battle unfolding above them. His battery indicator had shifted to amber at 35%. The decision was made instantly. He marked the boat's positions for the second wave already launching and for the other Ukrainian drones still airborne. Then it was time to evade or go down trying. He transmitted the coordinates and climbed straight toward the nearest Russian drone in a pure game of chicken. The Russian pilot broke away at the last moment, valuing his drone more than denying observation. The Ukrainian FPV held lock on the Zodiacs until the battery dropped to 20%. Then the signal died. The drone fell into the marsh below unrecoverable, but the coordinates were already moving through the network. The Russian Zodiacs, warned by their drone operators that Ukrainian FPVs were overhead, split apart into different channels to reduce the chance of a single strike hitting multiple boats. It didn't help. 3 fresh Ukrainian FPVs arrived from the north at attack speed, linking up with the 3 already airborne. The drones separated immediately, each committing to a different angle of attack. The lead Zodiac was hit directly at the waterline, precisely where the inflatable tubes met the rigid floor, the boat's structural weak point. 300 grams of RDX generated roughly 50 psi of overpressure, far beyond what the tubes were designed to handle. Rated for only 3.5 psi, they ruptured instantly along their seams. The second boat tried to escape toward the reeds, but a Zodiac moving at speed needs roughly a 30-meter turning radius. In a 10-meter channel, there was nowhere to go. The FPV adjusted for the boat's evasive movement and struck the transom, destroying propulsion. The third boat's operator aimed for concealment along the riverbank. He didn't reach it. The fourth boat got lucky, forcing itself deep into tall reeds. The crew believed concealment meant safety. Thermal cameras didn't agree. 3 human heat signatures clustered around a still warm engine glowed clearly against the cool vegetation. The remaining drones rotated in dropping grenades onto the beached Zodiac. The 30mm grenades weren't designed to sink boats. They were anti-personnel weapons with a lethal radius of 5 meters. Soon enough, the marsh was burning. 4 boats eliminated. Critical supplies would not reach forward observation posts before nightfall. Without resupply, those positions would be abandoned after dark, leaving 5 kilometers of riverbank unwatched for the next 72 hours. The Ukrainian operators were already displacing again, staying ahead of incoming mortars and the Russian Lancet drones that would inevitably follow. Tomorrow, the Russians would try a different method. Tomorrow, the Ukrainian teams would be waiting with fresh batteries. For now, the river was quiet again.